that particular doctor reached at that point, still there was no conceiving. That is 2015. Like I said, in my life of waiting, I had pauses. After going through the MRI, after going through the tubal cleansing, the ovary checks and all that, at that point, before the year ended of 2015, I went into a pause. I actually stopped seeing that doctor and went into a pause. I said, let me let this year pass. There's nothing much I can do. Maybe God will make a miracle along the way. I was still praying. Something happened to a friend. I lost a friend. Now, when I lost a friend and I was her matron, I cried so much. But after crying, I remember one thing. I'm like, God, we have lost her. At least she has gone when she has children. Children who shall look at and remember her. Then that thing rang in my head. I'm like, Aline, you could die anytime now. Like the way we didn't expect her to die. I pushed the child.
At 6 months?
At 6 months. I didn't know what it means. And I remember the nurse putting the child in front of me and said, she's a girl. And actually, just wrapped the child and they rushed. Already the intensive care unit was already waiting.
Hi everybody, my name is Renate and I'm very excited to have you on today's episode where we talk about waiting. This is a topic that is very crucial to each one of us because there are so many things that we wait for in life and they seem not to come up. But today I want to bring you a story of a lady, friend of mine, who has a story to tell us about her waiting period. Specifically, this was for a child. She waited for 8 years to get a child, and she's going to take us through her experience of waiting on God for a child and how it was for her. And without taking much of your time, allow me to welcome my guest in. But before I do that, I want to remind you to always subscribe to this channel. Every time you come and you realize you have not subscribed or liked any of the videos, please go back, like and share these videos. Subscribe to this channel so that I know that the content I'm creating for you is very helpful. Yeah, please subscribe. Let me even give you a minute to first subscribe. Thank you very much. So without taking much of your time, allow me to welcome my guest in. Hello.
Hello, Renate.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good to have you today.
Good to be here.
Kindly introduce yourself to our viewers.
Hello, viewers. To Message Allen, a mother of 2 beautiful flowers, married to a handsome man for 11 years now.
Wow, 11 years.
Yes.
Is that a long time or it's a short time?
It is a long time. Yeah. After what I will go through, you will see that it has been a long time.
Wow, but
yes.
Thank God for your family. So who is Allen?
Allen is passionate about the girl child, not just because I'm a woman, but because the girl child goes through a lot. Yeah. The girl child goes through a lot, even so what society has done upon her. Yeah. So I'm so passionate, and the kind of work I do is basically to empower the girl child. And I've seen so many girls being empowered, so many women being empowered. So basically that is what Allen is for. So that really has been my passion, and it goes a long way. And I believe touching one girl will change many.
That's so true.
You have talked about waiting. Yeah, waiting. Waiting is not a comfortable place to be in. I will tell you as I share. Even the strongest that you feel is strong is still frustrated by the word waiting. Like you said, you might be waiting for a child, you might be waiting for a job promotion. It is still not easy. Yeah. Because the waiting has phases, periods. So there are those that wait for a short time, there are those that wait for a long time, there are those that really wait for a very long time. And I would say my own situation, I guess I felt I waited for a very long time. Yeah. So anyway, I will go into my story. I got married at about 26 years, straight out of campus, a few years into the field, and I got married. That was in 2011, precisely October. October being our birth month, both me and my husband, meanwhile. So we chose that month. And I remember in 2011, October, we got married. It was a happy moment. Definitely like any married couple, after marriage, as a couple, some plan, some don't plan. They just wait for God to just lead them that way. So I would say as for a couple, I think we didn't plan, but we just waited. Like we thought it was automatic. Maybe you get married, you get children. Because we're not using any medication. So personally, women, they will say maybe they are on family planning, they are trying to buy time. But personally, I wasn't. And so I thought anytime I would conceive. So that was October, we get into November. We got into November, we got into December. That was okay. I wasn't on pressure. I mean, we have just gotten married. So it was okay. And so we get into January now, that is 2012. Get into January, still there was no pressure. But I would say by the time we got into January of the next year, 2012, I had been having irregular periods. And that wasn't a good sign for me because I had read a bit what it means to get irregular periods. Given my prior experience in my puberty, instead during my school time, the periods were quite heavy and very painful. But as the society people, older people say, by the way, you're going through that condition, it is not good. At the time you want children, it might affect you. So I remember in January, because from the time we got married, I was still having the irregular periods. Then we get into the next year. Now those are about 4 months now. We are still in irregular periods. So I'm like,
What do you mean irregular?
Irregular, like they come 1 month, another month they don't come. So actually, October they came, November they didn't come. So just know, you skip a month. So now it started scaring me because now I had read a bit, I was more enlightened, so I knew what it meant. But it wasn't a scare so much because I didn't see any medical doctor to tell me that if I'm okay or if I'm not. But I remember in that particular month, my husband telling me, you know what, I think you need to go and see a doctor. And I was willing because I thought it was my issue. And health-wise, meanwhile, even without looking for children, health-wise, it is not good. So that was the first time we actually visited a doctor, precisely a gynecologist, who was recommended by a friend. So we went together, the doctor checked me. Of course, they had to ask me different questions. Are you married? Are you planning to have children now? And well, yes, we said we are ready. So he said, okay, if this has been, of course he asked for the time it has happened, if it has ever happened even in my youngest age. So I told him, no, it is just happening now after me getting married. Like, okay. So he made his different tests, and I remember that time I had never heard about the hormones being checked and all that. I didn't even know the process it takes. So he's the one who advised, let's do the hormonal check and see these different hormones, like 4 hormones. Let's check them. And he explained, he labored really to explain to me what it means, the hormones, what does this do, if this is not balancing with this one, what will its effect be? And so he checked. So when we got the results, though the particular hospital wasn't checking for those, so he gave me the request form, and I had to go to another lab, a non-lab in Kampala where they do those checkups. So that was a day, and I had to take back the results the next day. So I did go, and he explained to me and told me, the hormones are not so bad, but this particular hormone that could actually, the one responsible for you to conceive is the one that is really bad. So we have to try and balance it. So that was my time of starting to take medication.
That is which month in 2020?
In that particular, it was still January, because early January is when we started seeking help to find out, not even for the children, but to see if I'm okay. So in that particular month still, that's when I began the medication. So definitely because I began medication, I thought, okay, now with reviews in between, take this medication for a week, then come back and we see. Of course, that meant money, as you know.
Yeah.
So, and I will tell someone waiting out there, the waiting of having a child, let me say, if you're, because even with the hormonal imbalance, it's basically the fertility checks.
Yeah.
So when we say infertility, infertility begins early. So I would say I put myself in the bracket of infertility because for the years I waited for 8 years. So I took the medication, went for reviews, and at some point they told me, okay, the hormones now are fine.
Yeah.
And that was about February of 2012.
Just a month.
Just a month. They told me the hormones are okay. Really, with no doubt, you should be able to conceive if you really want to.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no problem. And so at that time, my periods came back to normal. And like I said, we are not intention of saying today we are doing ABCD just to get a child. No, we're still living our normal married life. And so that month passed, went into the next month, that was March 2012 still. Now I remember in April, I did miss a period. And when I did, that was like an indicator of telling me, it seems you've conceived.
Yes.
Even when I told my husband, that's the first thing he said, hey, have you checked? He wouldn't say those things outright of saying, maybe you're pregnant, but he would say, are you okay? Maybe let's check. That time, these things of self-checks, I mean, you go and buy a strip from a pharmacy and go and check yourself. So there was not so much need of going to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I did my own self-check. There was nothing. But in between, I thought, maybe I made a mistake, these things. Maybe I didn't do it well. So I remember very well, I went to a nearby clinic and they did check. And when they checked me, at that point, I remember the young lady told me, it shows positive, but not the full strip, though there's a line. So there was that excitement. I remember that was the first time I had that news that I've conceived, and there was a lot of excitement inside me. I remember calling my matron, telling her, and she was so excited. So I get back home, tell my husband, I remember very well. Now that time I was skeptical. I wouldn't tell my husband outright because I had fears of saying, what if it is not there?
Yeah.
But I told him anyway because this is the clinic I'd been going to when I have minor illnesses, so I was very sure about their services. So I sat and waited. I wasn't seeing any sign. You know how people, you're vomiting, you're doing what? So I thought I would get those signs.
Yeah.
I wasn't seeing any sign. So like after 2 weeks, I'm like, I'm not seeing any sign. I'm very normal. I'm like, let me get out of this comfort zone of checking by near clinics. Let me go to a bigger hospital and check, maybe. And this time actually I didn't go to a bigger hospital to say I'm checking just the pregnancy test. I did go for a scan. So I go to another hospital and went into the scan. The doctor tells me, I don't see anything by the way. There's nothing. Are you sure where you checked from? They said there was something. At that time, meanwhile, I was not calm. I was a bit bitter because I was sure. But I had gone with a friend. She calmed me down. She told me, you know what, just cool down. Let's listen to this doctor. Then we'll go back. At that time, I was sure I was heartbroken. I didn't know what to think. These now already, they were already about 1 year and a half. But because my belief was already I want to have a child, to some people it seemed a short time, but to me it wasn't a short time. So at that point I agreed, went back home, and I remember that next day I went back to the same clinic and asked the lady, but did you see well? And she told me, yes, I did. But also now she started explaining to me, there's what they call the false positives.
Yeah.
And all those things. Maybe this is a false positive, but don't lose hope and what. I remember that time she's the one actually who calmed me down and tried talking to me. And so I took it in anyway, and I said, this time it has failed, maybe next time. Yeah. So at that point, first track, that first attempt was at that point. Yeah. So that point, I stopped there, stopped putting pressure on myself and said, Alan, wait. First of all, you were told about the hormones. Are they still okay? They are okay. So you wait. So I remember that time I actually stopped thinking about it and I said, okay, let me wait. After all, the main issue that was stressing me is the irregular periods. They are now coming regularly. So anytime I should be able to conceive. So I went about our business as working. My husband is a businessman. We went ahead, started doing our own things. Now, for that year, I won't lie to you. I will say I waited. I prayed. Prayer has always been a part of my life because of so many things, but I prayed, not even just for a child, but for so many things. So at that year, let me say 2012, from when we did those tests and that came, I stopped. I didn't see any doctor until the year ended. 2013, we still went about that year. Now I remember mid-2013, I think that must have been June. That's when, now my husband didn't put pressure on me, and he was very, very intentional to talk about things of conceiving, of having a child. So he wouldn't just come and say, by the way, how come ABC didn't know? I remember that time he told me, hey, by the way, you last saw the doctor last year. Why don't we go and try and see this doctor? And that time I remember someone had recommended another doctor, a good one, around Kampala. So I told him, okay, no problem. So we go and see this particular doctor, go with our file, because now there I had some medical history, so I had to move with it. So I get there, and this doctor looks at the medical history, and he says, but this is not a big issue. Maybe at this point it was a big issue, but I can see it was treated, and I'm seeing this is much better. I think, really, so he starts asking, what is the problem? Have you faced this? Are you taking drugs? Like any other contraceptive? Are you... Now that's when he started advising us, okay, now I know you want to have children, but are you intentional? Because he's a businessman, he kept on saying, how often are you in Kampala? Such things. So like, no, he's a businessman, but he's always here. He does his business within. He says, oh, okay. So that time, I would assure you, I was calm. I didn't have external pressure. By that year, my husband didn't put me on pressure, but because of the prior experience, the one I've just told you about, at that point I started wondering, what is the problem? Why get such good news then they're telling me it is not? You know, when you've never gotten pregnant in your life and the first time they are telling you, and then the hope is lost at that point. So this particular doctor also takes us through some medication. That time medication of infertility is quite expensive, so you have to be prepared for it. Even when you're not, if this is something you're looking for, somehow you will take the medication. But we took the medication along the way, like any human being, you get tired of taking medicine. So after taking it for some time, like for 2 months, and nothing was happening, I said, I'm done with medication. I'm done with this thing. If God is to work, let him work. Otherwise, I'm tired of taking medication. And of course, you're out there talking to some people, your friends, and when they're like, taking also too much medicine is not good. You know, you're also having those other external pressure, voices. So, and at some point, you're also human, you get tired of taking medication. So you're like, by the way, I should stop. Or let me relax. Actually, to me, it wasn't even about stopping. I would say it was a time of saying, let me first stop, actually pause. At the time of my waiting, I had the pause periods. I would tell myself, Alan, pause and wait. So I remember that time I waited, I said, now I'm not going to take any more medication. And actually I remember my husband asking me, now have you gone back to the doctor? Now there were those reviews, and I would reach at a certain time where I would not go for the reviews, and my husband would ask me, have you gone for the reviews? Sometimes I would tell him yes when I've not gone. Some other times, yes, I've gone, but I'm no longer seeing sense in it. And so I stopped. Now that was 2013. So I stopped taking medication, but praying, joining prayer groups, believing. Now I think also at the back of my mind, however much I was trying to put myself on pressure, but I was also still thinking time is still on my side. So waited. Went into 2014. Meanwhile, 2014, I don't remember trying. I don't remember going to see any doctor. People would tell me, actually, go, there's this other doctor, but I wouldn't go. We also had our financial struggles around that year. So I felt like the little money we have, then go and see different doctors, consultations, then they give you a list of this and list of that in a day. Just one visit, you're spending about 200,000. No.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not going to go there. Let me wait if there's anything. And I remember in 2014, I didn't go for any visit, but I remember one time there was this particular doctor. They told me go and see him, but because I'd read about him and the women he has helped, I said, okay, Alan, give it a try. So I went. This time specifically, I went without any medical history.
So that it's your first time?
Yes. I wanted him to do his assessment and tell me without being biased by what other doctors have said.
Yeah.
So he went and he asked me, have you seen any doctor? I remember lying and said, I've not seen any doctor. It is my first time. So he writes down his list and tells me, you're going to do these checkups. And still he wrote down the hormonal checks. Because he asked me, have you ever done a hormonal check? I told him no. So I wanted to see how different his report would be.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I remember that time I went and did fresh tests. I remember I didn't even tell my husband by the way about this, because I knew he would tell me, why didn't you take the prior tests? Why didn't you do this? This time I did it alone. When I went for those hormonal tests, brought them back. Now remember the other time I told you there was one hormone, eh?
Yeah.
Now this time when I came back, when he did the tests again, now there were two hormones that were not balancing, which were crucial in this conceiving.
Yeah.
So he tells me, you know, this and this, they are ranges, either 6, either something is supposed to be like 3, now yours is like in 6. Something is supposed to be at 2, yours is like in 8. So those extremes, so they were really extreme meanwhile. Now I got worried. I said, okay, the last time the hormones were a bit, now they are getting worse. What is the problem? And so that's when he explains to me. He also writes down the medication I'm supposed to take. Meanwhile, because I had taken before, I could see that the medication is the same. He had not altered. Okay, the medication maybe he would recommend a particular brand from somewhere else, but basically the medication was the same. I even knew the medication. So I said, okay, I knew where to get it from, so it wasn't new. So I took that medication. Actually, I was very, very obedient, because I remember for that particular doctor, all the medication he told me to take, I took. The reviews he told me to go for, I went for those reviews. And I will tell you that entire year we were just on that same story of hormones, not anything else. And at some point, I think mid 2014, he tells me, that's when he starts recommending scans and tells me maybe check, maybe you have. He actually asked me, are you sure you don't have fibroids? You don't suffer? I'm like, no. And he tells me, okay, let's do the scans and I be sure. And I see if your uterus, actually, that time he explained something. I was like, okay, you may not have fibroids, but you know, your uterus might be, I don't remember how he termed it. So we went, did his check. And so he told me, the uterus is okay.
Yeah.
It is really fine, it shouldn't be an issue. So, but he's the same doctor who told me after some time, and told me, but from the hormones, the imbalance of the hormones, and I can see your physical futures, you suffer a syndrome. Many women suffer, though yours seems, it is not to the extreme. It's called PCOS, the polycystic ovarian syndrome. So your ovaries have a lot of cysts, like your eggs are covered by cysts. Those who know milk, that top cream that covers, so somehow it has to be removed. So he recommends, I remember that time after checking and telling me I have that syndrome, he recommended me to go to an X-ray center and told me to go, he wrote that check to check my eggs and see the ovaries, if really those cysts exist, and how, what extreme are they? Are they that bad? Are all the eggs covered with cysts? And I remember going for it. Meanwhile, it is a painful process. It's painful. So they check. And yes, they tell me, most of them are, because they could show me even on the scan, you see all these black things you're seeing. These are eggs, now these are the cysts that they are talking about. medical word, you get to learn so many things. So that is something I even didn't know. So I'm like, oh, so this is also because now, in between now, as I say, in this period of waiting, you're learning so many things.
Yeah.
In the medical world, there are things you didn't know about your body. So I get to learn that.
Yeah.
So I get back to him. He gives me medication still to help, like, remove certain, but he tells me there are eggs that are okay. So this shouldn't even be a hindrance. Yeah. If really you have to conceive, these ones can remain with their cysts, but there are eggs that can do what? But that time I remember him telling me one thing, but he was like, but most of your eggs are young, they're immature, and they are also being affected by the cysts. So I think we need to pull your eggs nearer and also give you some medication to mature them, something like that. Yeah. And I remember that time hearing all that, plus the financial implications. I listened and said, okay, maybe we shall take on that path, but I didn't take it up immediately. But I took the medication of that cysts and all that. Yeah. So after that medication, and actually the same doctor still had recommended for the tubes X-ray. But that time I didn't do the X-ray for the tubes. Now in 2015, still with the same doctor, I went and did the X-ray for the tubes. And they told me my tubes, I think the right one was blocked. So the doctor advised they needed to be cleaned. I didn't know what the process meant, meanwhile, of cleaning. But when I decided to do it, my God, it was too painful. It is the last thing I ever wished for. It was too painful. I think it is at that point I told God, but God, why do I have to go through this such pain? Why really? So they cleaned the tubes anyway. After cleaning the tubes, I thought that I was good to go. But this particular doctor, why I'm talking about this particular doctor, he kept on giving me chances, kept on investigating where I was not. Because I think as his patient, kept on wondering what is happening, what is this. Because even when we went through the process of washing the tubes, he said, okay, we have done this. Now he would give you a grace period of saying, let's try. If nothing happens, then. So in the process, as we had cleaned the tubes, but in the process, he starts reading. Now, because the hormones by then still hadn't balanced, now there was this particular hormone, he told me, this hormone has refused to balance, but there are different triggers. And I remember when we were having that talk, he told me, you know what, Alan, don't fear what I'm about to tell you, but we are going to try and see if there is no trigger of what I'm thinking about. That's when he told me about the tumor and told me, usually, these hormones don't balance, this particular hormone doesn't balance if you have a tumor on your brain. That was scary, definitely. I'm like, okay, if I go and check and I have a tumor, what next for me? Even when I told my husband, he was scared. He was like, no.
Tumor in the brain.
Tumor in the brain. I remember even telling my dad about that. He told me no. Now, immediately, when we talk about tumors, people would think about surgery.
Yes.
You understand?
And also in your case, someone would think the tumor would be in the uterus.
Exactly. Now, also, that's why I'm saying at that point of medical, I even asked him so many questions. But because every time he would tell me something, I would go back and read and come with information. So at that time when he told me, he told me, I know you'll read, so you'll be able to know. I know you'll have so many questions for me. So he recommended an MRI, and so got out of the MRI. I remember that particular nurse who was working on me asked me, what triggered you? How did you know? Because this is a tumor that hadn't grown for me to really. So I just told her, I'm trying to conceive, and this particular doctor advised this, and she was in shock actually. She was like, So she also gave her a bit of her story of her daughter in between there. I was like, I think we should see that doctor because, this is something anyone could never think of.
Yeah.
So through that process, it was a painful process mentally, emotionally, because at that point I even wondered, I'm like, okay, through this waiting period, I'm getting to learn so many things about myself. If it wasn't for looking for a child, when would I have known that I have something developing in my brain?
And knowing it early.
And knowing it early, actually.
Yeah.
So I even thanked God. I'm like, you know what? Some bad things lead you to good things.
Yeah.
So I took medication. I'm even shy to say, but I didn't go back for review, but I believed that I was okay. And that time actually I used to have constant headaches, which after some time actually when they told me how the tumor and what, my husband, I remember my husband is the one who told me, oh, that has been the cause of the constant headache. So that's when we started aligning certain things. And so I was fine. That particular doctor reached at that point, still there was no conceiving, that is 2015. Like I said, in my life of waiting, I had pauses. After going through the MRI, after going through the tubal cleansing, the ovary checks and all that, at that point, before the year ended of 2015, I went into a pause. I actually stopped seeing that doctor and went into a pause. I said, let me let this year pass. There's nothing much I can do. Maybe God will make a miracle along the way. So first track, I will tell you, 2016, I didn't try for anything. Actually, 2016, I think I didn't see any doctor. It was just about prayer. Actually, I think
How was your husband in that period?
Now, in that period, my husband is an interesting person. It is not something we would sit down and talk about like any other couple. Though he knew, I had my moments of being low, and I could be low because of some other things, but for him, he felt maybe now it is dawning. Remember, we've gone through these processes, so he kept on thinking, I'm now putting myself on pressure, but also what I'm going through in terms of what the checkups that have been done on me and discovering ABCD, they're affecting me now. So he wasn't very comfortable, but he was an encourager. Kept on telling me, you know what, at any time God decides to give us a child, it will be well.
Wow.
So those were my encouraging. Let me say, those were my words that I would keep re-echoing in my brain and saying, okay, God, my husband says this and this. Because I remember he made even a statement and said, I did not marry you for children. So this is not something, of course I want children like any other person, but this shouldn't be, it's not like it is the end of the world that when you don't have children, then this marriage has to end. No.
Yeah.
So don't put pressure on yourself. So that was encouraging, but like I said, the pressure I had on myself, at some point, I reached some point and started saying, you know what, Ellen, you need to slow down on yourself. Because I realized my own pressure was affecting even my husband, even the people I'm staying with. Because you know, with waiting, especially for a child, emotions are triggered.
Yeah.
Your temperament, you're short-tempered, everything. But I want to thank God for one thing, funny enough. In my circles, I had friends, they would be giving birth to children, we are doing baby showers. I will tell you, unless financially I couldn't go for a friend's baby shower, but I think I attended all baby showers of my friends.
Wow.
So I remember one friend of mine, actually, she always tells me, Aline, I don't know what you're made of. Because in your situation, if I was in your situation, I don't think I would attend any baby shower.
What do you think brings that? Sorry to cut you short.
No, it's okay.
What do you think brings that? How come for you it wasn't so much affecting you?
Now,
How
I
come
think
you could freely go to baby showers?
I think I could, first and foremost, these were my friends, whether they had children or not. You understand? That was the first thing. But also, I cannot pinpoint, but for some reason, things, because me wanting to have children, I would actually, for me, it did not trigger the negative effect. It instead triggered the positive, that I would be happy seeing someone having a child. It came naturally. And actually, most people would get surprised. That particular friend of mine said that, but even my other friends used to get surprised. So who went ahead, of course, like I said, those years were my years of pauses until about 2017. 2017, funny enough, 2017, I'm there.
There we are getting into our 5th year.
2017, is that 5th? No, that is 6th.
6th, okay.
So I'm just there, like you chat with your friends and all that. So there's this particular friend of mine. We talk once in a while. You know those friends that they are your friends, but you don't talk, chat always and what. So, and a few friends of mine will talk about my issues. Most of them it was like in the passive. I know Alan doesn't have a child. It's not something I have to really discuss.
Yeah.
Even if I'm recommending a doctor, somehow it is in the passive. So this particular friend of mine, one time I remember we were chatting, I don't know how it even came about, and she just says, by the way, there's this doctor. He has helped. I think she referred to a friend of hers. If you don't mind, you can check him out and see. Just try. Actually, I remember she emphasized, just try. So I told her, oh, okay. I remember I had my recess time, that waiting, the pause time. So I had, I think, relaxed a bit. Now I was ready to get up on my feet.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I'll go. I didn't go immediately, definitely. Like after 2 months, I said, okay, now that is 2017. I'm like, let me go and see this doctor they are talking about. But of course, when someone would tell me about a doctor, I would try to ask other people. So I remember that time I asked some other older people. They told me, that doctor, by the way, yes, he used to be good at our time. I think he's still okay. He's an old person. He's not these young doctors or something like that. I'm like, okay, I have recommendations from other people.
Yeah.
Good recommendations. So I go. Meet him. He also did his test. Now this time I went with my file. Meanwhile, by that time I can assure you my file of medicals. It was something of odd, and I used not to throw away any paper.
Yeah.
I would keep everything. So I get there with my file. He checks and checks. Says okay. Puts them aside and says, "Let me take this particular test." Still they were about to now because they had checked in the file. The main thing in that file was hormones.
Yeah.
So he says, let me check. I remember for him, he didn't even tell me to go anywhere. He called the person who does the checks. He came and checked me from there and gave him the results. And he looked at them. Yeah, of course, you know, they keep writing, kept on putting stars on certain hormones. Told me, gave me that. The first time I visited, actually, after checking that, he gave me like 4 tablets only. Told me, go and take these tablets, then come back after 2 days. Went, took the tablets, went back after 2 days. Now, it's like we had put up a calendar. Told me, now you're going to start. For him, actually, from the word go, he asked me, what do you eat? Start eating this, this, this. Avoid this and this.
Yeah.
That time, I remember the first time I think I hadn't gone with my husband. Then he told me to come back with my husband. So that time he said, was your husband checked? I told him, mm-mm. He says, why? Let him come and we check so that we work concurrently. If this thing is to work out, because now he had seen the years had gone.
Yeah.
Says, you know what, I want to handle you concurrently. If there's a problem anywhere, we solve it than first working on one person. So they do checks on my husband. He was perfectly well. Says, okay, now it seems the issue is this hormonal thing on you.
Yeah.
So let's tackle this. So we did that slowly by slowly, 2017. Nothing worked out. But mid-2017, before even the year ended, I happened to travel to Nairobi with my husband and met some friends of ours and relatives. And they recommended another doctor. Now, this particular doctor in Nairobi wasn't basically saying going to do any checks, but for them they were sure like, you know what, there are other options to getting children. You shouldn't stick to one if it has refused. So in that line, they were talking about IVF.
Yes.
Like, he's good, he's known, he has many clients he has worked on and they have been good.
Yeah.
Like an issue about money, you can pay in, like the payment plan was also discussed. So we did go and see that doctor, but I can assure you, in my mind, that was not an option I wanted. I still believed God would do a miracle if it meant a miracle.
Yeah.
But now at that point, I would say that's when I would say my husband now, I don't know if I should call it tired or he had become now a bit, I don't know if he was tired as in himself or tired of me putting myself on pressure. But I would term it that way because at that point he was really, you could see his mind was tuned to that direction. But deep down in his head, he knew I wasn't tuned. So there are things he would tell me, follow up on this, and I would be hesitant. But for him, I could see, even when it came to saving, looking for money, you could see he's saving towards that direction. Now they tell you that you need 20 million and you see someone, everything like that. But I remember it is that time, I would call it my turning point. I asked God. I'm like, God, I've always prayed. I've always cried unto you. And I have all the faith to believe that my time is coming. But my time will come not in this direction.
Yeah.
So God, just come out for me. Just make a miracle for me. That was 2017 as it was ending. We came back to Kampala. The doctor was waiting actually for some tests that he had told us to do from Kampala. He was waiting, I think, even for a deposit, something like that.
Yeah.
Really, for him, he would even remind you. And my husband was like ready.
Yeah.
Like everything you talk about, he will show you that now we are done. We are not going into let's try this and maybe this is where. Now there we had read, people had advised, we knew people who have gone through those processes. And you know, like how time comes that coincidences happen. That is a period when even when you're watching talk shows, people come giving testimonies about the same thing that you're trying. I'm like, God. So I remember very well, that was my cry for sure. That time, I felt like my hope had been lost. I felt like everyone surrounding me had lost hope. That's when I said, in this space, I have to believe for myself, because everyone surrounding me has now what? Lost hope. And actually, it dawned on me so much because of my husband. I felt he had lost hope. I felt the person I was killing in now had lost hope, and he was going in a different direction. So I said, Alan, believe for yourself. Even when I would be praying, I'm like, God, you know, I'm in this thing alone. That's what I used to say in my head. And so I remember that time, actually, my husband told me to call the doctor, do this, send the documents they need, and what emails would come in. I would just look at them. The year, of course, went by. And I remember in 2018, I was still praying. Something happened to a friend. I lost a friend. Now, when I lost a friend and I was her matron, that time she got an accident and she was with a son. I'm telling this story of a friend because I think at that point either God heard my cry or I don't know in between there, but I know it was God.
Yeah.
So she was in that accident with the son. Son was about 2 years, I think, if I'm not mistaken. The son survived, we lost her, but she had also a daughter who was about not yet even a year. Oh, a year, I'm not very sure, yes. But she wasn't in that accident with the daughter was home. So I remember that day I got that news, I was seated down. When I heard the news, you know how you get those goosebumps? I cried so much, but after crying, I remember one thing, I'm like, God, we have lost, I will not say the name, but we have lost her. At least she has gone when she has children. Children we shall look at and remember her. So actually, now when you lose someone, you really know it, because I kept on saying, okay, really, she died. Then that thing ran in my head. I'm like, you know, Aline, you could die anytime now. Like the way we didn't expect her to die. She could also die anytime.
Yeah.
You do not have any child. I can assure you, in between there, yes, I went for prayers. I did what? I kept on praying. Didn't pass me by. I remember that time one encouraging book that I used to overread, the first Samuel, that story of Hannah. Kept on reading that so I could shed all the tears. Actually, I had my Bible. I'm saying, this is my personal Bible. Even if tears go inside my Bible, it is mine. I'm not spoiling anyone's Bible. Yeah. I would cry inside that Bible. But I remember when I lost my friend that year, I remember very well that same year. Now towards the end of the year, you know how you go for those overnight prayers. I went with a couple of friends, went and did and prayed. And for that particular night, as you're crossing over to another year, they will tell you, write your prayer request. When that time comes, we are going to pray and believe that God is going to do miracles for us. Yeah. I remember telling God, I prayed about this thing for a very long time. I wouldn't even mention it. I said, God, you know I've prayed. You know my number one prayer request everywhere I go. Even when I'm in a fellowship, even when I'm with friends, even when I'm talking to someone to pray for me. You know it. Yeah. For this particular overnight, I'm not going to put this prayer request because you know it. I wrote so many other things, even friends who are trying to conceive, I put them down. But for myself, I said, God, I prayed over this thing and over again. I'm not putting it on this prayer request. And I didn't, meanwhile. I did. Because I keep my prayer requests. Actually, if for every year. I have them somewhere because I have one book where I write them. I didn't. And so we prayed. Went. I remember January. In my thinking, I could have conceived in that December of 2018. Because now, because of the irregular periods, they had come back a bit, so I couldn't tell. But I remember 2019, January, I kept on feeling unwell, but I thought, I'm not a person who gets sick, but I felt maybe it is fatigue from work, something like that. Until one time, as I was coming from work, I said, let me just go and check and see what.
Meanwhile, your husband is still doing the savings up for that.
Hey, yes, please, he's saving. He's saving. If I tell you the things he used to do for saving, I wouldn't want to say them, but there are so many things.
Yeah.
So, for him, that was something that he thought we are going towards too, meanwhile. But I remember, I think that me knowing that I had conceived, I think it was the January of 2019. But I believe it seems I had even conceived December, but it seems like end of December, but it seems I hadn't known. So, because I remember very well in Jan, that's when I felt a bit sick, went to hospital, and then they checked. That time we were just checking to see if I malaria. Then the doctor said maybe check for an infection, because that time I was also not feeling okay. There was a bit of discharge, so they checked if I had an infection. So this particular doctor goes and tells me, there is malaria, there's no infection, but you're pregnant. And I'm like, oh, just looked at the doctor. For sure, any other person would jump. I remember a friend of mine, when I told them, like, didn't you jump? Me, I was numb. I didn't even jump. Even the doctor kept on looking at him for some time. He was giving, like the way you can hold your paper and you're giving someone's results, and I'm not holding them, I'm still looking at him. Then I get them, change the paper, I write them behind, see. I just went back home. Now, why I'm saying that I was numb, because even when I got home, it is something I would go excited about telling my husband. I didn't tell him that night. I kept quiet, slept. Now in the morning is when I got the scare of my life. Woke up when I was bleeding. Now remember me who was checked last night that I'm pregnant. I'm now bleeding. But remember, I didn't tell my husband. I was in a scare telling him, wake up. That was about 6 a.m. Let's run. Like, what's the problem? I'm like, no, I checked that I'm pregnant. How come you didn't tell me? So you're in that, don't ask me about why I didn't tell you. Let's go. We rushed to the same clinic I had checked. This time it wasn't even about checking other things, but doing a scan.
Yeah.
They called the scan person who was not far away. They check, and this scan person is telling me I'm not seeing anything. Now they have lost my calmness. I'm all crying, I'm in tears. My husband doesn't understand. Remember, he has just gotten, he's in the mix. He's basically confused. Get into the car, he's still listening to the doctors. Now that time I felt the doctors at that clinic were just something else. They don't understand what they are doing. Immediately we ran. Now that time, remember 2017, I had gone, I was seeing that particular gynecologist that stopped at some point. Tell him, let's run to that guy. We rushed there. Immediately, I present my issue. The good thing I was the first person there, so I didn't wait. He looks at me, says this. I explained to him what has just happened and what I had checked. So he tells me, okay, come down. Actually, he told me, come down, go on the bed, instead of sitting or doing anything. He does his own check and says, oh, by the way, you're pregnant, but let's go to the scan now and see if everything is there. I go to the scan. The scan person tells me the same thing. I can see the heartbeat, like the fetal pole. It is hitting. Now there, I calm down. At least I'm more assured that there's a child. I calmed down, I relaxed. So at that point, they gave me some medication to stop the bleeding. Of course, it could be an attempted miscarriage. No one knew. So I took the medication. Of course, at that point, really, my hope was high. I was like, God, finally, you've come out for me. Now, actually, at that point, remember, we have been looking for each other, but this time, my happiness was, God, you've come out for me. I'm not going to go for IVF. I'm not going to, You know, when you're waiting, there are so many negative voices out there when it comes to culture, to relatives. You know, our traditional things of doing things. You didn't pay who and who, which singer and which singer. So there are so many voices you're hearing. Or people thinking they have all your life in their hands. If you have not done something for them, you will not get what you want. So all those voices were there. I may not have mentioned them in my story, but they were there. But I, for a person, I used to keep a deaf ear. Out of respect, because I knew if I was to exchange words, it wouldn't be a good place to be. So I would keep quiet. So at that point, I thanked God for all those things. I'm like, now, just protect my child. So that was my journey of being a mother. So that was a miracle in itself. My conceiving was a miracle. We moved. Each time I went, my baby was growing. Checked the gender. She was a girl. I was very excited. You know, being your first child, I'm excited in every way. Started buying a few things. Everything now you're seeing is baby. You know, my friends, the circles around me, people were excited because they knew my waiting time, my waiting journey. So people really, friends, relatives, those that were close to me, my husband, people were excited. People were happy. Now, why I say that was my first miracle is because, yes, the conceiving itself did not come easily. So it is a miracle in itself.
Yes,
But as my baby was growing, month 1, month 2, month 3, we got to the 6th month. When we got to the 6th month, I got an infection, I think, but I didn't realize it very fast. So that particular morning, I got to work. When I went to work, I kept on feeling unwell, abdominal pains. I thought, now, when you have people around you who have conceived and have children, like you're telling them what you're feeling, and they're like, that is normal. Usually around these months, women start feeling those funny sharp pains, you know. So I thought it was okay. But when to go to the afternoon, it was now something else. I was not really feeling fine. I said, let me go and see my doctor. So unfortunately, when I got to the doctor, he was leaving. I think he had an emergency. So he walked out. But remember, I was in a lot of pain. I said, I'm not going to stay here. I'm not going back home without what? Seeing a doctor. So immediately I had to go to search for the nearest hospital near that area. And so what I did, I went to the nearest hospital that was recommended nearby. It is a non-hospital, so I trusted it. Because at that point, my first pregnancy, I was very, very, very cautious of anything, of medication, of like anything could cause this child to get out. So I was very cautious. So even when I could say hospital, I would like, do I know its services? So for this particular one, at least I knew. I trusted, okay. So I went. They showed me the first doctor who could work on me, gave me a bit of painkillers and something. I said, you'll be fine. That night went back home, went through the night, but still not too fine. The next morning, I said, let me not go to work, let me rest. But then the next day I was supposed to see my doctor, but because I had stayed home and I was a bit weak, I said, okay, I'm still taking this medication. Let me finish it so that then by weekend, if really, because that was a Friday, if over the weekend I'm not really fine, then I'll see what to do. So I remember it was about 8 p.m. of Friday that night. I started seeing discharge, like water. I said, what is the problem? I've been taking this medication since last night. How come nothing is changing? Meanwhile, I tend to make myself strong, so I didn't even call anyone. Meanwhile, now we are in the house with our maid. My husband had traveled that Friday morning.
yes.
So we are basically alone in the house. She brings something to eat. I didn't even have the appetite, so I just take a bit of water, a bit of tea. So I was restless. But when to go to 10 p.m., the scare that came to me was when I went to the bathroom and I saw blood. Now that was my scare. Immediately, I didn't know what to do. we are alone in the house. There's no someone who is nearby to like rush me to hospital. So I started now making calls. I sent my husband a WhatsApp. He's offline. I think now maybe he had moved.
To another time zone.
I remember calling my brother. His phone actually was off, not that he wasn't picking. Now my other brother that I could easily call, I knew he had traveled, so I didn't know that he had come back, so I didn't even bother calling him. Then I called my brother-in-law. Now my brother-in-law being far, I kept on wondering, if I call him, when will he get here? But he was my last resort. I said, now let me call this one. Yeah. I call him, he picks up, but at that moment, I'm restless, I'm in tears. But I'm trying to make myself strong to make the calls to see who can come. Yeah. Because at that point, I felt, when I called him, he said, let me come. Now that was 11 to go to midnight. Now, somehow, blood kept on increasing. Immediately when he told me he's coming, it was now midnight, actually already midnight. But where he was far. Yeah. For him to drive quickly to my place, which is also far end. So I just dressed up, because that time now I was bleeding, vomiting. I think even the fear got me. I started feeling like as if I had malaria. I was basically not in a happy place. Yeah. So when he told me he's coming, I just put on a dress, put on a sweater, got my bag. I didn't even wait, called my maid, opened the door, told them lock up. I've gone to hospital. He hadn't even reached, but me, I was at the gate standing. In the night, I wasn't even fearing anything. Because when he even came, he just told me, you're standing out here alone. I'm like, I can't even sit, I can't do anything. We rushed. First went to the first hospital, locked. I don't know that time, but we lost the entrance of that place. Then we had to locate another one nearby. Entered there, night duty. Now that was like 1 a.m. Yeah. Night duty people, they are telling him, you know how you go to hospital, people ask him any questions yet for you know the situation you're in. Yeah. They go to, because it is late, some have taken a rest, a nap. Yeah. They go to call the guy on duty. He's also taking his time. I was pissed off. Because I knew the emergency I was in. At that point, so many things were running in my brain. I'm like, if I lose this child, first of all, not even just losing. I was there wondering, now this child, of course, 6 months a child has developed. Now I was wondering what is going to happen. So they check. I remember that time in that particular hospital, once they put me on the bed and checked, and what this particular doctor says, this is an abortion. I think they call it an abortion. The membranes are already broken. There's nothing we can save. Here we don't have incubators. Maybe call a hospital with incubators, but 25 weeks, I doubt if this child will make it. So at that point, that was the doctor saying, do you hear me? I felt, when I make my statement of saying I stayed believing in myself, even at this point, I knew these doctors do not have hope, but I have to believe for myself. I remember very well, I kept calm. My brother-in-law was there holding me. I remember one particular nurse, may God bless her, because we were up and down, also them trying to do the scan. I'm telling you that sometimes you can be surrounded, even when it comes to the medical ward, people who are supposed to restore hope make you lose hope. Yeah. Even when I went for the scan, this particular doctor was busy asking me, so what took you so long? So I'm wondering. So this particular nurse gets out. When we got out, we were supposed to take now the results to the doctor. This doctor is not following this up. He's up there waiting. This particular nurse says, no, you know what, already she's not in a good condition. The more she makes this movement, she's busy, what? The labor. Yeah. Let's get a wheelchair and do what? Immediately, once we gave the results, the nurse had already told us, like, you know what, let me call Nakasero. They could be having incubators. So we rushed. Reached there, they immediately put me on the bed, made their checks. But remember, the doctor was seeing was attached to that hospital. Yeah. So they were able to call the doctor and say, your patient is in this condition, ABCD. They briefed him. Immediately they briefed him. He says, now you kept on following up.
That's like 3 p.m. a.m.
Yes. Got doctors, other doctors there to attend to me as he comes in the next morning. So immediately they said, this child definitely, they tried now, they put me on different medication through the vein, so that to stop the labor. But for some reason, the labor pains were constant.
Yeah.
So the doctor at some point told them, you know what, let it be. Because the more you put on this medication, it may rupture her uterus. So just let it be. Let the child, if the child is ready to come out, let the child come out. If the child survives, well and good. So let it, meanwhile the labor pains, they continued, nothing. They did not stop. So even when they got me off the normal, they only left me on glucose for energy. So it was at about the next morning, Saturday, 7, do I remember very well? I think it was at, yeah, the next day, Saturday, 7:15 p.m. is when I gave birth. I pushed the child
At 6 months.
at 6 months. I didn't know what it means.
So you were
I
in
even
labor for 24 hours.
Because remember, in between they tried to stop. Then the things didn't work out. So now they let it be to take its normal process.
Yeah.
My husband, remember, I was not around. I had my brothers in hospital. My in-laws, of course, were alerted. They came. My sisters-in-law, my brother-in-law, of course, was already there. My matron, everyone was there. So inside that room, I didn't know. My husband kept on communicating with my other people. But it was a scare because we didn't know. You know how you know that a child develops, but at 6 months, you don't know how a child even looks like.
That's true.
But I remember pushing my child, and I remember the nurse putting the child in front of me and said she's a girl, and actually just wrapped the child and they rushed. Already the intensive care unit was already waiting on standby. I put my child in an incubator. At that point, I've given birth. Meanwhile, I was, funny enough, with all that stress, but after pushing, I was happy. Like I pushed my child. And for some reason, yes, it happened early. I didn't know what it meant for 6 months. Are they going to survive or not?
Yeah.
But deep down in me, I had the faith that my child was going to survive. I, for some reason, one voice kept on ringing in my mind that this is a miracle upon a miracle.
That's true.
That is something that kept on ringing in my mind. My scare was, how long are we going to be in hospital? What do the cost implications mean? But deep down, I had the faith my child was going to survive. I didn't know how, but I knew my child would survive. So definitely, they admitted me, stayed there. The child, actually, I saw my child like the next day in the evening because they did a lot of now with those so many things. Now, my other people don't know whatever medication they had to buy, what. Remember, the lungs have not developed. There's some medication they have to put the child to grow the lungs, everything. So I didn't even see my child. Yes. So Sundays when they called me and said, now you can go in the nursery and see your child. So I went and found that different, like 1,000 wires on my child. I looked at my baby. I just fell down and cried. I didn't know what to think. I said, God, if there's one more miracle you have to do for me, let my baby be a living testimony. And so I looked at my baby, I cried. But I made one prayer, I remember, next to her bed and said, God, you have a reason why you brought this child early. Maybe to prove yourself.
Yeah.
That you're still a living God. That nothing can ever defeat you. I remember that time I called my boss because I know she's a prayer warrior. I said, hey, what's happened? Would I've given birth? And they were in shock because even I didn't tell them when I was in hospital. So they were quite in a shock. How? When did this happen? And all that. So they just started praying anyway. So at that point, I kept on telling anyone who cared to pray. As long as I knew you're a person who prays, really. I told them to pray. So we were basically in hospital for 2 months. Close to 3 months. But remember me, I wasn't there. So because all those were costs, Once I got fine, I had to go home. I had to express milk.
Yeah.
You understand? And keep every day. I would go to hospital every day. So me, these things of saying your honeymoon of Naka, when I didn't know it, because I had to do things for myself. I had to express milk. I had to move and take my baby, because my husband had to move and look for money.
Yes.
You get? So there was no time of me feeling vulnerable, if I'm using the right word. That point of being vulnerable wasn't there for me. So I had to be strong for myself and for my baby. Because I kept on telling myself, Alan, if you're not strong for your child and for yourself, who's going to be strong for you? Because I knew now my husband was in a mix of looking for money, east and west.
Which is also needed.
Yeah, which is needed. So I couldn't even feel bad that today he's not here, that today he's not in hospital, no. Because I knew he had to look for the money. He also wanted to see the child survive. So all that time when we were there, it was about hope. It was upon hoping that my child would live another day. Actually, it was already, I would always rejoice when I would wake up and I'm getting a call telling me my child slept well. My child has hit this milestone. Maybe they have removed one wire, now they're on less wires. Maybe they are moved from a different, there are so many machines. There's that first machine when the case is extreme. Yeah. Now they are off that machine, they're in a machine that is in a better condition. So many tests done on that baby. Every day I would go there, every day pray. But also, like I said, when you believe in God and trust God, somehow it gives you favor. Yeah. And also surrounds you with people. I remember every nurse that was given to my child, because the nurses used to have a rota, I think they changed in terms of babies will be assigned to different, like the way you say, Alan, you're assigned to this. Yeah. All the nurses that were assigned to my baby, meanwhile, not even all the nurses, the entire nursery knew Miracle. Meanwhile, we named her Miracle. So, but I remember one time when I went, I was in shock. And actually it made me tear so much. I found a balloon written on, Miracle, you're a gift from, you're a miracle from the Lord. You will be a living testimony. And I think this particular nurse who had taken care of her that particular day is the one who wrote that prayer on that balloon. You don't know how much hope that gave me. You don't know how much faith that was lifted in me to know that the people taking care of my child are praying for her. Yeah. They are believing that she's going to live. That gave me so much hope. My child was in that incubator, but very active. Very active. You'd see the ribs. Like the body is all formed. Actually, funny enough, my child had hair. It was like if she was to reach 9 months, how much hair was she going to have? Yeah. So, but it gave me so much hope. I believed, I'm like, you know what? So each time and now I came, I was much stronger because even the people within, the nurses would encourage you, pray with you. And I met other mothers I've been when semester. And every time you'd be in that nursery, believe me, they are bringing another child. There are even normal children who have reached the months, but this time maybe they are different. A child is very chubby, looking good, but has a heart problem. You would break down, you come back, a child you're like, this bed, how come the child was here? They tell you the child is going to be with the Lord. So there were those moments of breaking down because other children are what? Other parents are losing children. Then I met another lady there, also had a child almost a similar weeks with my baby. We kept on praying. I found she was a very prayerful woman. So we would sit down, she would encourage me, you'll be well. So we kept on praying. We actually became friends. We would pray. And first she had given birth to a son. So she would tell me, for us we have booked our daughter. We are going to bring cows. So we would joke about that and laugh. So we used to pray. We used to pray. Of course, the bills, on a daily it was something else. You didn't want to look at the bills, but we believed. Friends and family stood with us, fundraised for us. And we also did our part. But I mean, us alone maybe wouldn't have made it. But against all odds, I thought about the money, but I said, God, if this child survives, there's no way these bills cannot be paid. That's true. So I believed, like I said, you find favor even where you'd feel you cannot leave the hospital without paying full amounts. I mean, we were able even to leave the hospital with the balance that we paid later. So for me, I know once you believe, you get what you want. It is not an easy place to be when you're waiting. We are all faced with different circumstances. Maybe in my story, you have not heard about external pressures from in-laws. There are those that are going through that. But at some point, you have to know that you'll have to positive talk yourself. Because there's when you can encourage yourself. Talk to yourself and say, you know what, you're going through this, but you'll make it. You're going through this, but just believe everything is working out. And so, and when we are saying external pressures at that point still, why I'm saying external pressures, people could push you to do things you don't believe in. I would not lie to you that at one point I didn't have people telling me maybe could go to this doctor. They are calling them doctors, but initially they are these African doctors that really you don't believe in, you see.
Yeah.
So there's also that push factor. So when you're so vulnerable, you can easily go because that's where you think you'll get what you want. But when you encourage yourself and still stay true to yourself and know that this, against all odds, I'm able to do this. There are those that you go and do. I won't say that I didn't take herbal medicine at some time. I did, but still it didn't work. To me, maybe at some point I say maybe it didn't work for me because all the same I didn't believe in it.
Yeah.
You see. But for some people maybe it would work out. But we can't. I always tell people, for those that care to know, especially those that come to me and say, what did you do? I always say, you know what, I cannot even pinpoint and tell you that when I did this, that's when I conceived. No. All I know one thing is faith. I had the faith that it doesn't matter when this child will come, but the child will come. But because I was faced with circumstances that made me feel like everyone had lost hope, and maybe I continued crying unto God, then it came. But also, I did not just cry to God without doing anything. I went, I think my story, I've talked about the many doctors, and maybe I've even tried to summarize the story, but I had seen so many doctors, gynecologists, physicians, any doctor, as long as someone believed that this doctor has done something, I would go and see the doctor. So I did not just stop at praying,
Yeah.
but I believed and had the hope and the faith. But alongside that, I had to seek for help from, medical doctors. But there are things that, like they say in the Bible, there are things you pray for that may not come immediately.
Yeah, that's true.
That you even don't know the cause. Because at one point you tell me about hormones. There are people whose hormones are very okay and they are not conceiving.
Yeah.
Yet there are those even who are in worse, hormones are even in a worse situation, but they still conceive earlier. So you'd ask, that some point I would ask myself, why 8 years? But why I'm saying faith and telling God, that surrendering to God that for you in your own ability you failed, then maybe that's when it works. Because I remember at one point I told God, you know what, like I already told you, I said I'm not praying about this thing again in terms of going out there and you're saying you're writing it down. But also I told God, you know what, manifest yourself. As me, I think this is where I stop. This is where I give up. So at some point, I think when I was giving up, God said, my dear child, I do not want to lose you. Let me do this one thing for you. So my miracle is there 3.5 years now in school, very active. Meanwhile, there is that talk of prematures that people will have, negative energy. They don't develop well. If they develop something, they will not do A, B, C, D, those funny things. They will not perform well. But my child is very active, very brilliant. Basically, like any child, she delayed a bit to talk. I was a bit worried. But people told me, no, even normal children who are born at 9 months delay to talk. So what are you talking about? So, but so that I put her in school, she now talks actually that we keep laughing at home that we were worried about her speaking. Now we are busy complaining about her speaking because she's like a chatterbox. So all those things you keep wondering. But let me just end my story because my story could go on and on. But as I end this story, how gracious and amazing God can be.
Yeah.
And actually, I always say God is a God of humor, really. 8 years you've waited, you get a child, a miracle upon a miracle. Conceiving is a miracle, even the birth itself is a miracle. But you just stay 1 year and you're pregnant again without even trying, without even wishing you want another baby.
That's
You
how
just,
you got your second child.
that's how I got my second child. I'm
So
like, okay,
easy.
God, so easily. So I'm like, God.
That's good for you.
So I called my baby, my second princess. I called that testimony. Some people would think this one would be the testimony, but I called her testimony. Why? I felt like God wants to show you that He can delay, but He can also be very early. You know?
I think that's the take home.
He can delay, but He can also be very early. So me, that was it. I just said, you know, God, I will still testify of your goodness, and I'll call this baby testimony.
Wow. And that's what you're doing.
That's my baby. I have my miracle, I have my testimony.
Wow.
God willing, God will bring kings in my life that will also will have a story.
Wow. 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 You know, I cannot even add on anything on her story. You know, as she was sharing, I kept on feeling like she had shared everything, you know. And if you're there and you've gone through such an experience or you're going through it, I want to let you know that God is not so early, neither is He late. Please hold on and trust Him. God is faithful. He can be trusted. God is faithful. He is faithful. Thank you so much for spending your time with us on this channel. And if you've not subscribed, please, please, please subscribe to this channel. I don't want to say it again, but please subscribe to this channel and let us know that such content is helpful and it will inspire us to create more. Thank you very much and have a great time.